7:02 in the morning. Opana Point, northern tip of Oahu, Hawaii. December 7th, 1941. Private George Elliott is staring at the oscilloscope screen of the SCR-270 radar unit. He has been on shift since 4 in the morning. The scheduled operating day ended at 7. The truck that was supposed to take him and Private Joseph Lockard to breakfast has not arrived. So while they wait, Elliott is practicing. He has only been with the radar unit for 2 weeks. He wants to get better at operating the set. At 7:02, his eyes go to the screen. He has never seen anything like this. The oscilloscope is showing the largest return he has ever observed. Not a blip, a mass. He says something to Lockard. Lockard looks at the screen. He thinks it must be a malfunction. He checks the equipment. The equipment is working correctly. Something is 132 miles north of Oahu. Something very large, moving fast, coming directly toward the island. Lockard later said it was the largest blip he had ever seen in all his time operating radar. Elliott says they should report it. Lockard is not sure. In the peacetime military, you do not call your superiors on a Sunday morning unless you have a very good reason. Elliott pushes. Lockard relents. Elliott picks up the telephone. The call reaches the Aircraft Warning Service Intercept Center at Fort Shafter at 7:02. Private Joseph McDonald takes the call. He listens. He looks around the information center. The plotting staff has gone to breakfast. The room is nearly empty. He finds Lieutenant Kermit Tyler at the plotting table. Tyler is 25 years old. He is a pursuit pilot, not a radar specialist. This is only his second shift at the information center. He has received no formal training in radar interpretation. He was told informally by a friend in the bomber groups that when Hawaiian radio stations played music through the night without interruption, it meant a flight of B-17 bombers was coming in from the mainland, using the radio signal as a navigation aid. That morning, Tyler had heard Hawaiian music on the radio during his drive to the base. He tells McDonald not to worry about it. It is probably the B-17S coming from California. McDonald is not satisfied. He calls back to Opana. He tells Lockard what Tyler said. Lockard is agitated now. He has been watching the contact on the screen. It has not changed course. It is still coming directly at Oahu. The return is enormous. He asks to speak directly with Tyler. Tyler takes the call. Lockard tells him the contact is unlike anything he has seen. A massive number of aircraft, coming fast, coming straight. Tyler says, "Don't worry about it." He ends the call. Lockard and Elliott go back to the screen. They track the contact until 7:40 when the return disappears into the island's own terrain interference, 22 miles out. Their relief has arrived by then. The truck to breakfast is ready. They go to eat. At 7:55 in the morning, the bombs begin to fall on Pearl Harbor. The 53 minutes between 7:02 and 7:55 were not nothing. Navy Secretary Frank Knox wrote in a report issued on December 14, 1941, that if the Opana radar contact had been properly handled, it would have given both Army and Navy sufficient warning to have been in a state of readiness, which, at least, would have prevented the major part of the damage done, and might easily have converted the successful air attack into a Japanese disaster. That assessment is debated by historians. There are real reasons to believe that 53 minutes would not have been enough time to scramble enough aircraft, disperse the fleet, and alert the gun crews across Pearl Harbor to convert the attack into an American victory. The communication chain from Opana to Fort Shafter to Navy Command to the fleet had multiple gaps that no single alert could have fixed in time. But what is not debated is simpler. Nobody tried. The largest radar return 2 American privates had ever seen was reported through correct channels, reached an officer, and that officer said, "Don't worry about it." The contact was not passed to the fighter wing. The contact was not passed to Pearl Harbor. The contact was not passed anywhere. 53 minutes. 2,403 Americans died. 18 ships damaged or sunk. 188 aircraft destroyed on the ground. And the radar at Opana Point had seen it coming. The SCR-270 was the first long-range radar system developed by the United States. It had been designed at the Signal Corps Laboratories at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey in 1937. Its operating frequency was 106 megahertz. Its maximum range was 150 miles. The Aircraft Warning Service had established 6 mobile radar sites on Oahu by the autumn of 1941. They were positioned to provide overlapping coverage of the approaches to the island. On Thanksgiving Day, 1941, the same day the Japanese fleet sailed from the Kuril Islands on its course toward Hawaii, the radar unit from Schofield Barracks was moved to Opana Point. The elevation of 532 feet gave it an unobstructed view of the Pacific to the north. 2 weeks later, it was looking at the largest air armada that had ever approached American territory. The men operating it were 19 and 22 years old. Neither had received formal schooling in radar interpretation. Lockard had more hours on the equipment than Elliott. But he had never been told what to do if the oscilloscope showed something that looked like an invasion fleet. Neither had anyone else on Oahu, because the Aircraft Warning Service was still being set up. Because the radar network on the island had only been in partial operation. Because the interpretation protocols, the communication chains, the decision trees that would convert a radar contact into an air defense response were not yet established. The technology existed. The technology worked. The technology detected the Japanese strike force 132 miles out and 53 minutes before the bombs fell. The organization that would have known what to do with that information did not yet exist. Lieutenant Kermit Tyler was not a villain. He was a young pilot assigned to an unfamiliar station on his second day of a rotation. He had no formal training in what he was doing. He had not been briefed on the war warning that General George Marshall had sent to Hawaii on November 27th, 10 days earlier. That warning had told commanders to take defensive measures against possible hostile action. Tyler did not know about it. He reasoned from what he knew. He knew B-17s were coming from California. He knew the radio had been playing Hawaiian music all night, which his friend had told him was the signal. He knew the Army did not scramble pursuit squadrons on Sunday mornings based on the calls of 2 low-ranking privates. He made a judgment that was wrong, but the judgment was made inside a system that had not given him the tools to make it correctly. No training, no protocol. No clear chain of command for what to do with an anomalous radar return. No communication with Navy command that might have added context. The Army investigated the events at Opana. The Roberts Commission, convened by President Roosevelt in the days after the attack, examined the entire chain of failures. Tyler was questioned. He was found to have failed in his duty, but was exonerated of any personal misconduct. The commission concluded that the alert had not been properly transmitted. That sentence covered dozens of broken links. Tyler was one of them, but only one. Private Joseph Lockard received the Distinguished Service Medal on February 10, 1942. He was cited for detecting the Japanese approach and reporting it correctly through his chain of command. The press portrayed him as one of the few people on the ball that morning. What the press did not report, because it had not been made public, was that Lockard had initially laughed when Elliott suggested they report the contact. He had called Elliott crazy. He had changed his mind only after Elliott insisted. And then he had reported what they saw, correctly, immediately, to the only channel available to him, and had been told not to worry about it. Lockard was commissioned as a lieutenant after Pearl Harbor. He spent the war as a radar officer in the Aleutians. He considered the events of December 7th as part of his life, but not the pinnacle of it. George Eliot served as an uncredited technical advisor for the 1970 film Tora, 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 which depicted the attack on Pearl Harbor. He died on December 20th, 2003. Joseph Lockard died on November 2nd, 2012. Kermit Tyler spent the rest of his life aware that his name was permanently attached to the most consequential wrong decision in American military history. He went on to a distinguished career. He flew combat missions in the Pacific. He was promoted to lieutenant colonel. He never claimed he had done the right thing on December 7th. He never denied what happened. Pearl Harbor followed him. The attack on Pearl Harbor produced immediate and massive investment in American radar capability. Major Kenneth Bergquist, who had been trying to build up the Aircraft Warning Service radar network on Oahu in the months before the attack, described the change this way. "After the 7th, he said, he just had to snap his fingers and he got what he wanted. The technology that had been underfunded, understaffed, and inadequately integrated into the Defense Command structure was now the most urgent military priority on the island. The number of radar stations on Oahu expanded rapidly. The training programs for radar operators were formalized. The interpretation protocols were established. The communication chains from radar detection to command authority were made explicit and tested. The Aircraft Warning Service became a functional, integrated air defense network. It became the model for similar networks built across American military installations worldwide. The radar warning network that the United States operates today, the system that detects incoming aircraft and missiles and provides the alert time that makes organized defense possible, traces its institutional origin to the Aircraft Warning Service and to the lessons of what happened when Opana called Fort Shafter and the officer on duty said, "Don't worry about it." There is a parallel story that runs alongside the one about the radar. On the morning of December 7th, the American destroyer USS Ward detected and sank a Japanese midget submarine outside Pearl Harbor at approximately 6:45 in the morning. This was reported to Navy headquarters. The report reached Rear Admiral Claude Bloch, Commandant of the 14th Naval District, who said he wanted to wait for verification before taking action. At 7:02, Lockard saw his blip. At 7:15, Tyler said, "Don't worry about it." At 7:55, the bombs fell. 2 separate warnings. 2 separate decisions not to act. 2 separate chains of command that did not communicate with each other. The failure at Pearl Harbor was not the failure of any one person. It was the failure of a system that had not yet organized itself to respond to the information it was receiving. The radar worked. The sonar worked. The men at the equipment did their jobs. The organization between the men and the response was missing. Building that organization, the protocols, the communication chains, the training, the integration of multiple warning systems into a coherent picture that a commander could act on, was the work that Pearl Harbor forced into existence. The Opana radar site is a National Historic Landmark. It sits on a hill on the north shore of Oahu, 30 miles from Fort Shafter, 532 feet above the Pacific Ocean. The original radar unit was mobile. It was mounted on trucks. It has been gone for decades. There is a commemorative plaque at the base of the hill. 3 large white domes now occupy the top of the hill. They are part of a Navy telecommunications station, a relay for the State Department's diplomatic telecommunications service. The hill still has an unobstructed view of the Pacific to the north. On the morning of December 7th, 1941, that view included 183 Japanese aircraft in the first wave of the attack, approaching at a distance that the radar at the top of that hill could see. Private Eliot saw them. He reported them. The chain of command was not ready to receive what he was reporting. Today, the chain of command that would receive that same call is a global integrated air defense network that operates 24 hours a day and has been continuously operational since the lessons of Pearl Harbor were absorbed. Applied. It is not perfect. No warning system ever is, but it exists. And it was built, in significant part, from the 53 minutes that passed between 7:02 and 7:55 on the morning of December 7th, 1941. The blip on the oscilloscope was there. The system to act on it was not. Building the system was the work that followed, and the work has not stopped. The Japanese fleet that struck Pearl Harbor had sailed from Hirokapu Bay in the Kuril Islands on November 26, 1941. 6 aircraft carriers, 2 battleships, 3 cruisers, 9 destroyers, 8 tankers. They had maintained strict radio silence for the entire crossing. No transmissions, no signals. Nothing for American intelligence to intercept. American naval intelligence had lost track of the Japanese carrier force in the weeks before the attack. They knew it had left Japanese home waters. They did not know where it had gone. The war warning from General Marshall on November 27th had told Pacific commanders to expect aggressive action from Japan. It had specifically mentioned the Philippines, the Malay Peninsula, and possibly Borneo. It had not specifically named Hawaii. The intelligence picture was incomplete. The warnings were general. The interpretation of those warnings at Pearl Harbor was that the threat was somewhere else. That interpretation was wrong. But it was not an unreasonable interpretation, given what the commanders at Pearl Harbor had been told. The war warning existed. The diplomatic cables indicating Japan was preparing for military action had been intercepted and decoded. The military had been told on November 27th that war was imminent. 10 days later, on the morning of December 7th, a radar operator on the north shore of Oahu was watching the incoming fleet on his oscilloscope and being told not to worry about it. The warnings existed at every level. The system to connect them did not. What would 53 minutes have changed? The question has occupied historians for 80 years. The honest answer is that the question cannot be definitively resolved. 53 minutes is approximately the time it takes to scramble a fighter squadron and get it to altitude. Approximately the time it takes to pass an alert from Fort Shafter to Pearl Harbor and for gun crews to reach battle stations. Approximately the time it takes to move ships from a concentrated anchorage formation to dispersed positions where torpedo attacks are less effective. Whether 53 minutes would have been enough to accomplish any of those things in a military establishment that was largely unalerted on a Sunday morning is uncertain. Navy Secretary Knox believed it would have been enough to prevent most of the damage. Other analysts concluded that the communication delays, the Sunday morning skeleton staffing, and the general state of unreadiness meant that even with a proper alert at 7:02, the response would have been too slow and too disorganized to significantly change the outcome. The 2,403 Americans who died that morning cannot be given a different history by the answer to that question. What can be said is this: the information was there. The technology that produced it was there. The men who operated that technology did their jobs. The gap was organizational. The gap was in the space between the radar operator and the commander who would have needed to act on what the radar operator saw. Closing that gap, permanently and systematically, across all American military installations and eventually across the entire Western defense architecture, was the institutional work that Pearl Harbor made urgent and that subsequent decades completed. The Roberts Commission submitted its findings to President Roosevelt on January 23, 1942. It found that the Army and Navy commands at Pearl Harbor had failed in their duties. Admiral Husband Kimmel and General Walter Short were relieved of their commands, but the Commission also described a broader failure. The warning systems were not properly integrated. The communication between Army and Navy commands on the island was inadequate. The training and protocols for responding to radar and other intelligence inputs were incomplete. The Commission's findings drove immediate reform. Joint Army-Navy coordination structures were strengthened. Radar training programs were formalized. The chain of command for air defense alerts was explicitly established. What happened in the following years was a transformation not just of the radar network, but of the entire institutional architecture for processing and acting on warning information. The Joint Chiefs of Staff, formally established in February 1942, was part of that transformation. The centralized command structure that replaced the fragmented pre-war organization was part of that transformation. The intelligence fusion process that brought together signals intelligence, imagery, and technical intelligence into a coherent picture for commanders was part of that transformation. Each element traced its origin in part to the lessons of Pearl Harbor, and the most specific lesson of Pearl Harbor was the 53 minutes at Opana Point. The oscilloscope had the answer. Nobody had built the path from the oscilloscope to the decision. The integrated air defense systems that protect American territory today are the descendants of the Aircraft Warning Service. The North American Aerospace Defense Command, known as NORAD, was established in 1958 and has maintained continuous watch over North American airspace ever since. It integrates radar networks, satellite sensors, and other detection systems into a unified picture. Its response protocols are explicit and tested. The chain of command from detection to decision is unambiguous. NORAD did not exist on December 7, 1941. The concept it embodies, persistent integrated air surveillance with clear protocols for acting on what the surveillance reveals, was created in response to Pearl Harbor and the Cold War threats that followed. The SCR-270 radar at Opana Point, manned by 2 privates with no formal training and no clear protocol, detected an attacking force at 132 miles and 53 minutes of warning time. That is what radar could do in 1941. Today's systems detect threats at distances and times that would have been unimaginable in 1941. And the organizations that act on what those systems detect have been built, tested, and continuously refined for 80 years. Built from the lesson of the morning, when the blip was there and the response was not. Don't worry about it. 3 words. The work of 8 decades. And a system that now never stops watching. There is one more detail from the morning of December 7th that the historical record preserves. Private Joseph McDonald was the switchboard operator at the Fort Shafter Information Center. He took Elliot's call. He brought it to Tyler. He called back to Opana when Tyler dismissed it. He spoke to Lockard. He returned to Tyler a second time, noting Lockard's urgency. He suggested calling the plotters and notifying Wheeler Field. He arranged for Lockard to speak directly with Tyler. When Tyler again said, "Don't worry about it," McDonald did not know what else to do. He was a switchboard operator. He had done everything a switchboard operator could do. He had connected the information to the person who had authority to act on it. The person with authority had declined to act. McDonald's son George later said that his father had been in the first battle of World War II, Pearl Harbor, and the last, Okinawa. Colonel At.he, the commanding officer of the Aircraft Warning Company, said after the war that had Tyler informed the fighter wing, it may have been able to get airborne in sufficient time to intercept and reduce the impact of the attack, saving lives, fleet, aircraft, and equipment. U.S. Associate Supreme Court Justice Owen Roberts, in reviewing what McDonald had done that morning, told him that his warning to Tyler was more urgent and historic than the famous message to Garcia, the legendary example of military initiative and communication. McDonald heard "Don't worry about it." He went back to his switchboard. 53 minutes later, he heard the bombs. He spent the rest of his life with that morning inside him. Not because he had failed. He had not failed. But because he had been at the exact point where the information ended and the response did not begin, The Battle of Pearl Harbor was not the first time in the 20th century that a warning had been seen and not acted upon. The Titanic received iceberg warnings from other ships and maintained speed. The Lusitania was warned about German submarine activity and sailed into waters where a U-boat was waiting. The USS Indianapolis was sunk in July 1945, and its distress calls were not acted upon for days. Each of these events shares the same structure. Information existed. The information was not connected to a response. People died. The lesson that American military planners drew from Pearl Harbor was not simply that they needed better technology. They needed the organizational infrastructure to turn technology into action. The radar worked. The men worked. The chain of command between the radar and the decision failed. Building that chain, making it explicit, testing it, maintaining it, was the institutional project that occupied American military planners for the decades that followed. It was never finished. It is never finished. Every new sensing technology raises the same question. Who is watching? Who receives the alert? Who has the authority to act? How long does the path from detection to decision take? The SCR 270 at Opana Point asked that question on December 7, 1941, at 7:02 in the morning, and the answer took 53 minutes too long to arrive. Private George Elliott insisted on making the call. That is the part of the story that does not get told often enough. Lockard had laughed. He had called Elliott crazy. He had been ready to let the contact sit and go to breakfast. Elliott pushed. He had been with the radar unit for 2 weeks. He had less experience than Lockard. He had less confidence in his own ability to interpret what he was seeing. But he thought they should report it. He insisted. And because he insisted, the call was made. And because the call was made, the information reached the information center. And because the information reached the information center, McDonald found Tyler. And because McDonald found Tyler, the event was documented. The documentation entered the historical record. The historical record drove the investigation. The investigation produced the reforms. If Elliott had let Lockard laugh it off, none of that chain exists. The attack would have been the same. But the learning would have been different, because the learning came not just from what happened, but from the documentation of how it happened. Elliott insisted. Lockard reported. McDonald escalated twice. Tyler said, "Don't worry about it." All of that was documented. All of it went into the investigation. All of it produced the changes that made the next warning system different from the one at Opana Point. The blip was there. The report was made. The system was not ready to receive it. And the system that came after was built specifically so that would never be true again. 702. The largest blip Private George Elliott had ever seen. He picked up the phone. That is where it started. 702. The truck to breakfast was late. 2 privates kept the radar on. One of them saw something. One of them insisted they report it. The report was made. Don't worry about it. 2,403 people died. And the system that came from that morning, the persistent watch, the clear protocols, the unbroken chain from detection to decision has been running every hour of every day since 1942. Built from what failed, running because it failed, still running. The blip was always real. It just needed a system ready to receive it.